My name is Dr. Alex Ramsey, and I've spent the last 2 decades of my life peering into the darkest corners of the human psyche. As a forensic psychologist, I've sat across from individuals who have committed unspeakable acts, delved into their minds, trying to understand the why, the how, the intricate workings of a mind capable of such darkness. I've worked with hardened criminals, those whose eyes hold no remorse, and with those who seem lost in a maze of their own making, their actions a desperate cry for help gone tragically wrong. But of all the cases that have crossed my path, none has stayed with me quite like the story of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was more than just a writer. She was a weaver of dreams, an architect of desire. Her romance novels, devoured by millions worldwide, weren't mere stories. They were portals to worlds of passion and longing, forbidden love and ultimate fulfillment. She crafted characters so real, so relatable, that they leaped off the page and into the hearts of her readers. Her words, imbued with an almost magical quality, had the power to transport you to sun-drenched villas in Tuscany, to windswept castles in Scotland, to clandestine rendezvous in the heart of Paris. And yet, for all the passion she poured into her novels, Eleanor Vance herself was a creature of solitude. She lived a life of quiet seclusion in Carmel by the Sea, a picturesque town nestled along the California coast. Her home, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, was a sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in her writing, her imagination her only companion. The irony, of course, was that the woman who wrote so eloquently about love and connection lived a life largely devoid of both. It was in this idyllic setting, amidst the beauty and tranquility of Carmel, that tragedy struck. At precisely 8:15 a.m. on the morning of October 27, 2023, the stillness of the day was shattered by a discovery that would send shockwaves through the community and beyond. Eleanor's housekeeper, a kind woman named Mrs. Avila who had been with Eleanor for years, arrived at the house to find the front door slightly ajar. A sense of unease settled over her as she called out Eleanor's name, her voice echoing unanswered in the normally bustling house. A trail of disarray led her through the living room, where a vase of lilies lay shattered on the floor, their fragrant perfume now mingling with a metallic scent that made Mrs. Avila's stomach churn. She followed the path of destruction towards Eleanor's study, her heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. The door was open, and what she saw inside would forever be etched in her memory. Eleanor Vance, the woman who had brought so much love and joy to the world through her words, lay sprawled on the floor, her lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The room was in disarray, books scattered across the floor, papers strewn about like fallen leaves. A single crimson stain bloomed on the pristine white carpet beneath her, a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the ocean visible through the window. The pen she always used, a beautiful antique with a delicate nib, lay on the floor beside her, its inkwell overturned, adding another dark stroke to the grim tableau. Mrs. Avila, trembling and breathless, fumbled for her phone, her fingers slipping on the screen as she dialed 911. Her voice, thick with panic, relayed the horrifying scene to the dispatcher, the words Eleanor Vance and dead hanging heavy in the air. Within minutes, sirens wailed through the quiet streets of Carmel, shattering the peace of the morning and signaling the arrival of the police. The news of Eleanor's death spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of grief and disbelief in its wake. Fans mourned the loss of their beloved author, their connection to her forged through the intimate words she had shared. The quiet community of Carmel was shaken to its core, the illusion of safety shattered by this brutal act of violence. And as the police began their investigation, they were faced with a mystery as intricate and compelling as any of Eleanor's novels. Who would want to harm this seemingly harmless woman? Was it a random act of violence, a burglary gone wrong? Or was there something more, something darker and more sinister at play? One thing was certain, the death of Eleanor Vance had opened a Pandora's box, unleashing a torrent of secrets and lies that threatened to consume everyone in its path. And as I delved into the details of this case, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a murder. It was a story of obsession, of blurred lines between fantasy and reality, a story that would ultimately challenge everything I thought I knew about the human heart. The flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars cut through the morning mist, casting an eerie glow over the normally peaceful neighborhood. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peered from behind curtains, their whispers mixing with the chirping of birds and the distant roar of the ocean. The idyllic facade of Carmel by the Sea had been shattered, replaced by a scene straight out of a crime drama. Detective Maria Sanchez, a seasoned investigator with the Monterey County Sheriff's Department, arrived on the scene with a grim determination. Her sharp eyes, honed by years of experience, took in every detail: the overturned furniture, the scattered papers, the crimson stain on the carpet. She moved through the house with a quiet efficiency, her movements precise, her gaze unwavering. "A burglary gone wrong," her partner, Detective Miller, muttered, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. He gestured towards the ransacked living room, the broken vase, the drawers pulled from their cabinets. "Looks like they were looking for something valuable." Sanchez knelt beside Eleanor's body, her gloved hand gently checking for a pulse, though the outcome was already clear. The victim's face, normally serene and full of life, was now frozen in a mask of fear. A thin trickle of blood had dried on her temple, suggesting a struggle. "Maybe," Sanchez said, her voice barely a whisper. She noticed the overturned inkwell, the pen lying on the floor. But something doesn't feel right. She examined the study more closely. The chaos seemed almost too deliberate, too staged. The valuable electronics were untouched, the jewelry boxes still closed. It was as if the intruder had been specifically targeting Eleanor, not her possessions. "Forensics is on their way," Miller said, interrupting her thoughts. "They'll tell us more." Sanchez nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. She interviewed Mrs. Avila, the housekeeper, whose account was filled with shock and grief. Mrs. Avila had arrived at 8:15 a.m., as she did every Tuesday and Friday, to find the front door ajar. She had no enemies, no reason to believe anyone would want her dead. As the day wore on, the forensic team meticulously combed through the crime scene, collecting evidence, dusting for fingerprints, and photographing every detail. The initial assessment seemed to support the burglary theory. There were signs of forced entry at the back of the house, a broken window leading into the kitchen. Footprints, likely belonging to the perpetrator, were found throughout the house. But Sanchez couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The lack of stolen valuables, the targeted nature of the attack, the almost theatrical arrangement of the crime scene, it all pointed to something more than a simple robbery. "We're dealing with a professional," Detective Miller said later that evening, as they reviewed the preliminary forensic report. "Someone who knew what they were doing. Or someone who wanted us to think they were a professional," Sanchez countered, her eyes fixed on the crime scene photos. "This feels personal, Miller. Like a message." The question was, who was sending the message, and what did it mean? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Carmel coastline, Detective Sanchez knew that this case was far from solved. The death of Eleanor Vance was not just a tragedy. It was a puzzle, a labyrinth of secrets and lies, and she was determined to unravel it, one clue at a time. But where to begin? The world of Eleanor Vance, with its passionate fans and intricate fictional worlds, seemed as vast and mysterious as the ocean that bordered her home. And somewhere within that world, hidden in plain sight, lurked a killer. The death of Eleanor Vance sent ripples of shock and grief far beyond the quaint confines of Carmel by the Sea. News outlets across the country picked up the story, her face gracing the covers of newspapers and magazines, her name whispered in hushed tones on television screens. The woman who had once sought solace in solitude was now the subject of intense public scrutiny, her life and work dissected and analyzed by strangers. Eleanor Vance, the author, was a household name. Her novels, with their evocative prose and passionate love stories, had sold millions of copies worldwide. She was a master of her craft, weaving tales of forbidden desires, second chances, and the enduring power of love. Her characters, flawed yet relatable, leaped off the page, their struggles and triumphs resonating with readers from all walks of life. But Eleanor Vance, the woman, remained an enigma. She rarely gave interviews, preferring to let her work speak for itself. Her public appearances were few and far between, limited to the occasional book signing or literary event. She cultivated an air of mystery, a mystique that only served to fuel her readers' fascination. She was a private person, her publicist, a polished woman named Sarah Jenkins, told reporters, her voice carefully modulated. She valued her privacy and preferred to focus on her writing. This reclusiveness, however, only served to intensify her fans' devotion. They saw in her a kindred spirit, a woman who understood the depths of human emotion, the complexities of love and loss. They pored over her novels, dissecting every word, every nuance, searching for clues to the author's own heart. Online forums dedicated to Eleanor Vance buzzed with activity, fans sharing their interpretations of her work, speculating about her life, and expressing their grief over her untimely death. They mourned the loss of a woman they felt they knew intimately, even though they had never met her in person. "Her books were my escape," one fan wrote, her words echoing the sentiments of many. "She wrote about love the way I always dreamed it would be. I felt like I knew her," another commented. "Her characters were so real, so relatable. It's like she was writing about my own life. This parasocial relationship, this one-sided connection between a public figure and their fans, was a double-edged sword. It could be a source of comfort and inspiration, a way for fans to feel connected to something larger than themselves. But it could also be dangerous, blurring the lines between fantasy and reality, leading to obsession and even stalking. Detective Sanchez, as she delved deeper into Eleanor's life, became increasingly aware of this dynamic. She scoured through fan forums, social media posts, and online reviews, searching for any clues that might lead her to the killer. She noticed a pattern, a recurring theme in many of the comments, a sense of entitlement, a belief that they truly knew Eleanor, that they had a special connection with her. She was ours. One particularly disturbing post read. She belonged to us, her readers. No one else could ever understand her the way we do. Sanchez felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just admiration, it was obsession. And somewhere within this sea of devoted fans, a darker current was flowing, a current of possessiveness and rage. As she continued her investigation, Sanchez couldn't shake the feeling that the key to solving this case lay within the intricate world of Eleanor Vance's fandom. She needed to understand the motivations, the desires, and the potential for darkness that lurked within this community. And as she delved deeper into this world, she began to realize that the line between admiration and obsession, between fantasy and reality, was far thinner than she had ever imagined. While the idyllic town of Carmel mourned the loss of its beloved author, and Detective Sanchez meticulously pieced together the fragments of a shattered life, a young man named Daniel Keller sat alone in his cramped apartment, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face. He was a man of contrasts, a gentle smile that rarely reached his eyes, a quiet demeanor that masked a turbulent inner world. He worked as a barista at a local coffee shop, his days filled with the aroma of roasted beans and the chatter of customers, yet he felt profoundly disconnected from the world around him. Danny, as he was known to his few acquaintances, was an avid reader, a lover of stories. But his passion for literature went beyond mere enjoyment. It was an escape, a refuge from the mundane realities of his life. And among the many authors he admired, none captivated him quite like Eleanor Vance. He had discovered her novels by chance, stumbling upon a dog-eared copy of The Tuscan Lover at a used bookstore. He was immediately drawn in by the raw emotion, the forbidden desires, the whirlwind romance that unfolded within its pages. He devoured the book in a single sitting, then immediately sought out more of her work. Eleanor's novels became his obsession. He read and reread them, analyzing every word, every sentence, every paragraph. He felt a kinship with her characters, their longing for connection, their search for love in a world that often seemed indifferent. He saw in Eleanor a kindred spirit, a woman who understood the depths of human emotion, the complexities of the heart. But Danny's admiration for Eleanor soon morphed into something more intense, more consuming. He began to blur the lines between fiction and reality, imagining himself as the hero of her novels, Eleanor as the object of his affection. He spent hours online, scouring fan forums, reading interviews, and poring over every detail of her life he could find. His online activity became increasingly obsessive. He created multiple accounts on social media, following Eleanor's every move, commenting on her posts, and sending her private messages. He joined online fan groups, engaging in discussions about her work, often inserting himself into the conversation with long rambling posts about his own interpretations of her novels. His behavior, once merely enthusiastic, began to take on a disturbing edge. He started showing up at her book signings, lingering after the event, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to exchange a few words. He even sent her gifts, small tokens of his affection, accompanied by handwritten letters expressing his admiration. These letters, initially filled with praise and adoration, gradually became more personal, more intimate. He wrote about his own life, his struggles, his dreams, his longing for connection. He confided in Eleanor, sharing his deepest thoughts and feelings, as if she were a close friend, a confidant. He imagined her reading his letters, her heart touched by his vulnerability, her own loneliness echoing his own. He fantasized about meeting her, about forming a real connection, a bond that transcended the author-fan dynamic. But reality was far different from his fantasies. Eleanor, overwhelmed by her demanding schedule and her desire for privacy, rarely responded to fan mail. Her silence only fueled Danny's obsession, his frustration growing with each unanswered letter, each missed encounter. He felt rejected, ignored, unseen. The woman he had placed on a pedestal, the woman he believed understood him, had failed to acknowledge his existence. His admiration curdled into resentment, his longing twisted into a dark obsession. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Danny's obsession with Eleanor Vance spiraled out of control, leading him down a dangerous path, a path that would ultimately end in tragedy. The death of Eleanor Vance left a void in the literary world, a silence that echoed through the hearts of her countless readers. Her unfinished manuscript, a tale of forbidden love set against the backdrop of Victorian England, lay abandoned on her desk, a poignant reminder of a life cut short. But the world of publishing, ever eager to capitalize on tragedy, saw an opportunity. Sarah Jenkins, Eleanor's publicist, with the blessing of the Vance estate, announced that the manuscript would be completed by a trusted colleague and published posthumously. The news was met with a mix of anticipation and apprehension by Eleanor's fans. They yearned for one last glimpse into the world she had created, but they also worried that the magic, the essence of Eleanor's writing, would be lost without her guiding hand. The trusted colleague, it turned out, was none other than Daniel Keller. He had, in the weeks following Eleanor's death, insinuated himself into the online community of her fans, offering insightful commentary, sharing personal anecdotes, and even claiming to have corresponded with Eleanor in the past. He presented himself as a devoted admirer, a scholar of her work, a keeper of her legacy. No one suspected that the quiet, unassuming barista was, in fact, the author of the anonymous emails that had plagued Eleanor in the months leading up to her death. No one knew of the obsessive fantasies he had harbored, the blurred lines between fiction and reality that had consumed his mind. Danny, emboldened by his newfound anonymity and the trust he had cultivated within the online community, saw this as his chance to finally connect with Eleanor, to become a part of her world, even if it was only through her words. He pored over the unfinished manuscript, immersing himself in the story, the characters, the world that Eleanor had created. But as he worked, he couldn't resist the temptation to leave his own mark, to subtly alter the narrative, to inject his own fantasies into the story. He tweaked dialogue, added scenes, and even changed the ending, ensuring that the love story culminated in a passionate, forbidden union, a reflection of his own desires. He felt a thrill, a sense of power, as he manipulated the words, shaping the narrative to fit his own twisted vision. The publication of The Victorian Secret, as the novel was titled, was a resounding success. Critics praised the poignant love story, the evocative prose, the seamless continuation of Eleanor's style. Fans, eager to savor one last piece of their beloved author's work, devoured the book, unaware of the hidden hand that had guided its completion. Danny, basking in the glow of the novel's success, reveled in his newfound notoriety. He attended book signings, posing as a close friend of Eleanor's, sharing intimate details of her life, and offering insights into her creative process. He even granted interviews, his voice trembling with feigned emotion as he spoke of his dear friend and her lasting legacy. He was living a double life, a charade that fueled his fantasies and fed his obsession. He was no longer just a fan, he was a collaborator, a confidant, a keeper of secrets. He had become, in his own mind, an extension of Eleanor Vance herself. But as Danny's deception grew, so did the risk of exposure. His online persona, once a carefully constructed facade, began to unravel. Inconsistencies emerged, contradictions surfaced, and suspicions arose within the online community. And while Danny reveled in his newfound fame, Detective Sanchez, unaware of his true identity, was slowly closing in, her investigation leading her deeper into the labyrinth of Eleanor Vance's fandom, closer to the truth that lay hidden in plain sight. Detective Sanchez stared at the computer screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. The online world of Eleanor Vance's fandom was a tangled web of admiration, speculation, and increasingly suspicion. The initial shock and grief over the author's death had given way to a fervent desire to understand the circumstances surrounding her murder. Theories abounded, accusations were flung, and the once harmonious community was fracturing under the weight of paranoia and mistrust. Sanchez, with the help of a young tech-savvy officer named Diaz, had been meticulously sifting through the digital debris, tracking online conversations, analyzing social media posts, and following the digital trail of Eleanor's most ardent fans. It was a tedious process, like searching for a needle in a haystack, but Sanchez was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply buried it might be. One name kept popping up in her searches: Dan the Man. He was a prolific contributor to the online forums, his posts often long, rambling, and filled with obscure references to Eleanor's work. He claimed to have corresponded with the author, to have shared intimate details of her life, and to have a deep understanding of her creative process. He was, in many ways, the epitome of the devoted fan, the ultimate insider. But something about his online persona didn't sit right with Sanchez. His claims seemed exaggerated, his insights too intimate, his tone bordering on possessive. She dug deeper, tracing his online activity back through months of posts and comments, and a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Dan the man had been one of the first to express his grief over Eleanor's death, his posts filled with anguish and disbelief. But as the weeks passed, his tone shifted, becoming more assertive, more authoritative. He began to position himself as a spokesperson for the fan community, a guardian of Eleanor's legacy. He was also quick to dismiss any theories that painted Eleanor in a negative light. He vehemently defended her against accusations of plagiarism, rumors of a secret love affair, and whispers of a troubled past. He seemed determined to protect her image, to preserve her reputation, even in death. Sanchez noticed another peculiarity. Dan the man often used phrases and expressions that mirrored those found in Eleanor's unfinished manuscript, The Victorian Secret. He seemed to have an uncanny familiarity with the story, the characters, and the nuances of the plot. "Diaz," Sanchez called out, her voice sharp with excitement, "pull up the manuscript for The Victorian Secret and compare it to Dan the man's online posts. I want to see if there are any direct quotes or paraphrases." Diaz, his fingers flying across the keyboard, quickly complied. Within minutes, the screen was filled with highlighted passages, matching phrases, and overlapping sentences. The evidence was undeniable. Dan the man had intimate knowledge of the unfinished manuscript. "This is it," Sanchez said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "This is our connection." She delved deeper into Dan the man's online profile, tracing his IP address, cross-referencing his username with other online platforms, and piecing together his digital footprint. The trail led her to a small apartment complex in Monterey, a nondescript building that housed a young man named Daniel Keller. Sanchez pulled up a photo of Daniel Keller, his face pale and unassuming, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. She compared it to the photos of the attendees at Eleanor's last book signing, the event where she had first noticed the unsettling presence of an overly eager fan. There he was, standing in the back of the crowd, his eyes fixed on Eleanor, a faint smile playing on his lips. The same quiet intensity, the same unsettling gaze. Sanchez felt a surge of adrenaline. She had found her suspect. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. The obsessive fan, the intimate knowledge of the manuscript, the possessive online persona, it all pointed to Daniel Keller. But she needed more than just circumstantial evidence. She needed concrete proof, something that would link him directly to the crime scene. And as she prepared to confront Daniel Keller, she knew that the final chapter of this tragic story was about to unfold. The Carmel Public Library, normally a haven of quiet contemplation, buzzed with an unusual energy. A crowd had gathered, a mix of local residents, avid readers, and media personnel, all drawn by the promise of a glimpse into the life and work of their beloved author, Eleanor Vance. The posthumous publication of The Victorian Secret had reignited the public's fascination with the enigmatic writer, and this book signing, featuring a close friend of the deceased author, promised to offer a rare glimpse behind the curtain. Daniel Keller, standing behind a table draped in black cloth, felt a surge of adrenaline as he surveyed the eager faces before him. He was no longer just a fan, a mere observer in the world of Eleanor Vance. He was now a central figure, a confidant, a keeper of secrets. He had, through a combination of cunning and circumstance, become an extension of the author herself. He smiled warmly as he greeted each attendee, his voice soft and reassuring, his words carefully chosen to convey his intimacy with the deceased author. He shared anecdotes about Eleanor's writing process, her quirks, her passions, weaving a tapestry of fabricated memories that captivated his audience. He signed copies of The Victorian Secret with a flourish, adding personal inscriptions, offering condolences, and basking in the admiration of the crowd. He felt a thrill, a sense of power, as he manipulated their perceptions, perpetuating the illusion of his close relationship with Eleanor. But amidst the adulation, a sense of unease gnawed at him. He noticed a woman standing at the back of the crowd, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through his facade, her expression a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He tried to ignore her, to focus on the task at hand, but her presence was unsettling, a constant reminder of the precariousness of his deception. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman, Detective Maria Sanchez, watched Daniel Keller with a practiced eye. She had spent weeks studying his online persona, analyzing his every word, every post, every comment. She had traced his digital footprint, piecing together the fragments of his identity, his obsessions, his lies. She had seen the subtle changes he had made to Eleanor's manuscript, the way he had injected his own fantasies into the narrative, the way he had manipulated the story to fit his own twisted desires. She had recognized the phrases, the expressions, the intimate details that he had gleaned from his obsessive online stalking. She knew that Daniel Keller was not just a fan, not just a close friend. He was the killer. As Keller continued his performance, Sanchez moved through the crowd, her movements deliberate, her gaze unwavering. She approached the table, her badge held discreetly at her side. "Mr. Keller," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I'd like to ask you a few questions." Keller's smile faltered, his eyes widening in surprise. He recognized the woman from the back of the crowd, the one whose gaze had unsettled him. He felt a wave of panic wash over him, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before his eyes. "Detective Sanchez," he stammered, his voice betraying his nervousness. "What a surprise." "Indeed," Sanchez said, her eyes fixed on his. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic evidence bag. Inside, nestled amongst cotton swabs and tweezers, lay a single delicate pen nib, its tip stained with a dark crimson hue. "This was found at the crime scene, Mr. Keller," Sanchez said, her voice now laced with steel. "It matches the pen you're using to sign those books." Keller's face paled, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. The crowd, sensing the tension, fell silent, their gazes fixed on the unfolding drama. I don't know what you're talking about," Keller stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I think you do," Sanchez said, her voice rising. "I think you know exactly what happened to Eleanor Vance." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. "You were obsessed with her, Mr. Keller. You stalked her, you harassed her, you invaded her privacy. And when she rejected you, you killed her." Keller's facade finally shattered, his face contorted in a mask of rage and despair. He lunged for Sanchez, his hands outstretched, but two uniformed officers materialized from the crowd, tackling him to the ground. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs, their shock and disbelief palpable. The man they had admired, the one who had shared such intimate details of Eleanor Vance's life, was now revealed as her killer. As the officers led Keller away, Sanchez turned to the stunned crowd, her voice ringing with authority. "This case is a tragic reminder of the dangers of obsession," she said, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her. "It's a reminder that the line between admiration and obsession, between fantasy and reality, can be dangerously thin." She paused, her eyes settling on a young woman standing near the front, her face streaked with tears. Eleanor Vance was a gifted writer, a woman who touched the lives of millions through her words, Sanchez continued. But she was also a victim of a man who could not distinguish between the world she created and the reality she lived. She took a deep breath, her voice softening. "Let us remember Eleanor Vance for her talent, her passion, and her legacy," she said. "And let us learn from this tragedy, so that no one else has to suffer the same fate." The crowd, still reeling from the shock, stood in silent contemplation. The book signing, once a celebration of Eleanor Vance's life, had become a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most devoted admiration. And as the library doors closed, signaling the end of the event, a sense of closure, albeit a bittersweet one, settled over the room. The mystery of Eleanor Vance's death had been solved, but the void left by her absence would remain, a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of words. The story of Eleanor Vance is a tragedy, a stark reminder of the fine line between admiration and obsession, between the allure of fantasy and the harsh realities of life. But it's also a story of resilience, of the enduring power of words, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Eleanor, despite her reclusive nature, touched the lives of millions through her writing. Her stories, filled with passion, longing, and the complexities of human connection, resonated with readers from all walks of life. She gave them an escape, a glimpse into worlds where love conquered all, where dreams came true, and where the human spirit triumphed over adversity. Even in death, her words continued to inspire, to console, and to connect. Her legacy lives on, not just in the books she left behind, but in the hearts of those who were touched by her stories. But Eleanor's story also serves as a cautionary tale. It reminds us that even the most well-intentioned admiration can turn into a dangerous obsession, blurring the lines between fantasy and reality. It highlights the importance of boundaries, of respecting the privacy and autonomy of others, even those we admire from afar. The pursuit of justice, as demonstrated by Detective Sanchez's relentless investigation, is another powerful lesson we can take from this story. Despite the complexities of the case, the tangled web of online personas and hidden identities, Sanchez never gave up. She followed the evidence, she trusted her instincts, and she ultimately brought Eleanor's killer to justice. This story, with its intricate layers of suspense, psychological intrigue, and human drama, has stayed with me long after the final verdict was delivered. It's a story that deserves to be shared, a story that can spark important conversations about fandom, obsession, and the delicate balance between our online and offline lives. If you were captivated by this tale, if you were moved by its complexities and its lessons, I urge you to share it with others. Subscribe to this channel for more explorations into the human psyche, the dark corners of our world, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Let's continue this conversation together, let's learn from the past, and let's work towards a future where stories like Eleanor's serve not just as cautionary tales, but as catalysts for positive change. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, remember, the human mind is a complex and fascinating landscape, and sometimes, the most compelling stories are found in the darkest corners of our